October 3rd, 1862. As Major General William Rosecrans looks over the rolling countryside north of Corinth, the fears that had swirled around his mind have become true. Just across the field is the arriving 22,000-man Confederate army of Major General Earl Van Dorn, thought days prior to be passing the junction to invade Tennessee instead. Now, with Van Dorn's Confederates poised to attack the town, Rosecrans only has 5,000 men on hand to stop this impending assault. With the rest of his men hours from the battlefield, Rosecrans knows that his thin blue line faces a daunting task. Just as he finishes his final preparations, the atmosphere goes quiet. Surprised by the silence, the Federal defenders pop their heads over the parapets to see what is going on, only to witness column after column of screeching rebels rush out of the trees in full battle array. Rosecrans' brave little force has run out of time. The Second Battle of Corinth has begun. During the Civil War, when generals wanted to contact others, they made sure to use secure telegraph lines to ensure no prying eyes would be able to see what information they are sending. Because of this, any information that finds its way into the wrong hands could be detrimental to one's plans. Just like your personal data when you surf the web. That is why you should get NordVPN to keep your information secure from prying eyes when using unsafe networks. You can get NordVPN today by using my link nordvpn.com/Warhawk or clicking on it down in the description. NordVPN is a leading data security service in today's internet-addicted world, ensuring that your passwords will be safe from being stolen, keeping suspicious files from infecting your computer, or stopping hackers from keeping your sensitive data hostage. Some of the best features of NordVPN are its advanced protection in keeping out disrupted malware, and its ability to detect fake shops and dark web data leaks. With how much I use the internet to research my videos, I make sure to use NordVPN to secure my data. If you are interested in protecting your data from prying eyes, you can use NordVPN's special offer. At the moment, you can get 4 months extra on a 2-year plan using my link nordvpn.com/Warhawk down in the description. If you're not satisfied with NordVPN's service, you are guaranteed your money back within 30 days of signing up. Thanks again for NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Fall 1862. Confederate armies are on the move all across the nation. In the east, General Robert E. Lee and his army in Northern Virginia presses north into Maryland after the federal debacle at Second Manassas, hoping to strip the border state out of Union hands to isolate Washington, D.C. In the west, Generals Braxton Bragg and Edmund Kirby Smith march north through the Cumberland Gap and invade Kentucky, looking to destroy Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio and claim the Bluegrass State for the Confederacy. In Mississippi, Generals Sterling Price and Earl Van Dorn plan a joint operation into West Tennessee, hoping to reclaim lost territory after the fall of Corinth. And finally, in the Trans-Mississippi Theater, Major General Thomas Heidemann is gathering a force to challenge Union control over the Ozarks. With all these Confederate armies on the move, it is no wonder that Grant has called this period the darkest days of the war. Despite all the simultaneous invasions of the North, the most pressing for Major General Ulysses S. Grant is the dual threat to West Tennessee. These are the twin Confederate armies of Major General Earl Van Dorn's 16,000-strong Vicksburg garrison and Major General Sterling Price's 16,000-strong Army of the West. With Bragg taking the Army of Mississippi east of Block Buell's march to Chattanooga, the new theater commander orders these two armies to keep Grant distracted and docile in Mississippi. Though both armies have been assigned the same task, they are independent of the other, and as long as they remain separated, neither has authority over the other. Not only that, these two commanders chosen for this operation couldn't be more opposed to cooperating. Van Dorn, despite being a friend to President Davis, is despised by both his men and the other ranking officers in the Confederate Army after his disastrous defeat at Pea Ridge. Price, on the other hand, is the polar opposite. He's a man loved by his troops and is easy to work with, even though he has a burning desire to return to his adopted state of Missouri. If these two armies ever link up, Van Dorn, being the senior ranking general, would take command of both forces. With Grant's forces scattered along a defensive front in northern Mississippi, a combined Confederate army might be able to easily isolate and destroy the various federal garrisons in detail, a luring proposition. In the end, Confederate fortunes in Mississippi depend on these two conflicting personalities to put aside their differences and work together. Facing this Confederate threat in Mississippi are the federal armies left by Major General Henry W. Halleck after the dissolution of his massive force at the beginning of June. Grant, being the senior ranking general after Halleck, is given command of the two armies left in the region. This force consists of his own Army of the Tennessee and Rosecrans' Army of the Mississippi, with a combined total of 63,000 men. Major General William S. Rosecrans, second in command behind Grant, is a rising star in the Union Army. Being part of the brilliant West Point class of 1842, the same class as Earl Van Dorn, Rosecrans is a man of rare ability, who strives for excellence. For all his talents, Rosecrans felt unappreciated while serving McClellan in his 1861 conquest of West Virginia. Chafed by the lack of recognition, he secured an assignment to Pope's Army of the Mississippi during the March on Corinth. Even with all his amazing abilities, Rosecrans has a knack for irritating superiors, something Grant will soon be all too familiar with. Despite outnumbering the scattered Confederate armies in Mississippi over 2-1, Grant is hamstrung in his position. Due to being left by Halleck to consolidate their previous gains, a major drought afflicting the region, and disease incapacitating thousands of men, the Federals are forced to remain on the defensive for the near future. To utilize his time, Rosecrans starts building up his defenses around Corinth, adding 5 earth lunettes on the high ground within half a mile of the rail intersection. But with no alarming threat and unable to move, the Federals slip into a state of laziness in their positions around Corinth, letting their readiness fall into ruin. By late August, the stalemate that has reigned over the summer months of 1862 is coming to an end. With only Price remaining in northern Mississippi to threaten the federal garrisons, and Van Dorn being lured away by the prospects of recapturing Baton Rouge, Grant orders Rosecrans to send 2 divisions north to help Buell deal with Bragg's northward push into Tennessee. On September 1st, Price receives orders from Bragg to prevent Rosecrans from joining Buell. Knowing that he cannot attack Rosecrans alone, Price calls on Van Dorn for support. The Mississippian, however, has no intention to support Bragg and is more interested in recovering West Tennessee. Instead, Van Dorn urges Price to link up with him to maneuver Rosecrans out of Corinth, which he deems too costly to take by force. Hearing of Van Dorn's plan, Price is incredulous. He has his orders to harass the Union rear, and Van Dorn is daydreaming about pushing the Federals out of Mississippi. On September 7th, unable to dally any longer, Price notifies Van Dorn that "I am moving immediately against Iuka in accordance with orders just received from General Bragg, who again instructs me to follow Rosecrans." Hoping that Van Dorn will come to his aid, Price waits another 4 days before starting north. Finally, on September 11th, Price advances his small army to intercept Rosecrans, which he suspects of passing through the small Mississippi town of Iuka. As the men under Old Pap march north, onlookers in each town witness a rarity in the war. A camel named Old Douglas is seen among the ranks of the 43rd Mississippi carrying the officer's baggage. Not being native to the continent, Douglas will be the only camel people might ever see. After a few days of marching through the sweltering heat of northern Mississippi, the Confederates near the small federal depot of Iuka, just east of Corinth. On September 14th, Price's Confederates rush to town and capture the depot before the departing Federals can destroy it. The capture of Iuka is a boon for Price's near-destitute men as they find thousands of pounds of much-needed supplies. While Price is out conquering Iuka, Van Dorn has been in correspondence with Davis about getting sole command of all troops in Mississippi. Once he is given Price's army, Van Dorn starts planning his own offensive against the Federals. Van Dorn wants to take Memphis, but knows if Grant still controls Corinth, he will not be able to get close. Therefore, to take Memphis, Van Dorn needs to push the Federals out of Corinth. With the chain of command now in place, Van Dorn orders Price to link up with him west of Corinth. When Price gets the order from Van Dorn, he readies his force to march at daylight the next day. Meanwhile, Grant does not intend to allow the Confederates to march unimpeded around Mississippi. As long as Price and Van Dorn remain separated, they will remain a minor threat, and Grant wants to keep it that way. On September 17th, Grant and his subordinate Rosecrans formulate a plan to trap the elusive Missourian. The two generals agree on a pincer movement that will envelop the Confederates. The plan calls for Major General Edward Ord to hit Iuka from the northwest, while Rosecrans swings around and attacks Price from the south. If successful, Price will be cornered and his entire command either captured or destroyed. On September 18th, Ord steps off towards Iuka. Because he has a more direct path, Ord arrives later that day. Rosecrans, on the other hand, waits until the 19th to march towards Iuka. In Iuka, Price is about to contend with Ord when he gets word of Rosecrans' approach from the south. Reacting quickly, he turns to face this new threat. The two sides battle it out until darkness ends the fighting. Despite the surprise, Price is able to hold the field, even with the death of Brigadier General Lewis H. Little, who considers his right-hand man. Realizing that his army is caught in a pincer, Price pulls out of Iuka that night on the Fulton Road, which is luckily left unguarded, and heads south to link up with Van Dorn. The next morning, the Federals find the town empty of Confederates except for the dead and dying. Just as they thought they were done with the rebel problem, Grant immediately drives everybody back to Corinth in case Van Dorn attacks while the town is left undefended. Though they are unable to capture or destroy Price at Iuka, they have dealt the Missourian a blow and are back ready to defend the vital crossroads from any possible attack. Price's army, tired and demoralized from their adventure at Iuka, finally joins forces with Van Dorn at Ripley on September 28th. The startling fight confirms the suspicions that only through cooperation with Van Dorn will they be able to overcome Grant and Rosecrans in Mississippi. Once the two forces merge, Van Dorn names this new force the Army of West Tennessee, which consists of 3 divisions, 2 under Price and 1 under his own command. Price's corps contains 15,000 men split between 2 divisions led by Brigadier General Louis Hebert and Brigadier General Dabney H. Maury. The remaining 7,000 men make up Van Dorn's sole division, under the command of Major General Mansfield Lovell. Despite Price and his men having just fought a battle, Van Dorn wants to make an immediate drive against Corinth before the Federals can concentrate. Now with a combined force of 22,000 men, the Confederates hold a numerical edge that will let them easily defeat the various Federal outposts that guard the Memphis and Charleston Railroad. To swiftly take the town, Van Dorn plans to march his men north to Pocahontas, cutting out the Federal supply line just north of the state line, pivot to the east, and then descend upon Corinth from the northwest. From this direction, he will be able to avoid most of the earthworks his men built to face Halleck's gigantic army back in May. If all goes to plan, when Corinth is taken, Grant and Rosecrans will be forced to abandon Mississippi, reversing all the losses that were sustained back in the spring. When Earl Van Dorn reveals his plan to his officers, they are surprised. Brigadier General Dabney Maury, one of Price's division commanders, favors the plan wholeheartedly. However, both Price and Lovell oppose the plan. They see attacking the very fortifications their men built to be suicide, and would prefer another, less bloody method to remove the Federals from Corinth. Regardless of the objections, Van Dorn is not altering his plans. The Confederates will attack Corinth. On September 29th, the Confederates march north from their camps in Ripley. Many hope they are marching north to support Bragg in Kentucky, yet, just as they're getting their hopes up, the army veers to the southeast, heading towards Chihuahua. When the Confederates arrive on October 2nd, the division commanders brief their subordinates on the plan to attack Corinth. Many are shocked and some are physically upset. The man who threw caution to the wind at Pea Ridge is once again leading them into battle, this time against an entrenched foe. Meanwhile, when Rosecrans receives reports of Van Dorn and Price linking up, he becomes concerned that Corinth will soon be their target. Currently, he only has a division of Brigadier General Thomas J. McKean, around 5,000 men, that garrison the entrenchments. If the rebels do intend to attack Corinth, it is imperative that he pulls in all his forces to face this threat. While he waits for more reports to filter in before he acts, Rosecrans puts McKean's men to work strengthening their position. When news arrives that Van Dorn is marching his way, Rosecrans immediately orders the scattered divisions to rally upon the town. He also sends a report to Grant, who rallies Ord's division to hurry to his aid. But being over 40 miles away in Bolivar, it will take Ord a few days before he can reach Corinth. With 23,000 men and 4 divisions positioned in and around Corinth, it will be a matter of time before each one arrives. Brigadier General Charles S. Hamilton, with 6,000 men, will leave his position at daybreak on October 3rd for a 5-mile march to Corinth. Brigadier General Thomas A. Davies, in command of 2,900 men, waits until 7 a.m. to start his 6-mile march to the town. Being the furthest from Corinth, Brigadier General David S. Stanley and his 7,000 men get up before dawn to begin their 6-hour trek. Finally, McKean, who is already in Corinth, sends a portion of his division up the Chewalla Road this time in the approaching rebels. For Rosecrans, it is a race against time to see who will reach Corinth first. When dawn appears on Friday, October 3rd, 1862, all that stands between Van Dorn and the lost crossroads of the Confederacy is McKean's lone division. Though Rosecrans correctly guessed the Confederates would pass the night at Chewalla, they started earlier than expected for their final leg to Corinth. Impelled by fear of Grant arriving with reinforcements, Van Dorn fiercely drives his army on their 9-mile march to Corinth, intending to attack as soon as he arrives. Leading the army towards Corinth is Villapig's brigade of Mississippians in Lovell's division. As the Confederates come within 3 miles of Corinth, the first shots of the battle are fired at 7 a.m. by Villapig's men, who push Oliver's outnumbered Wisconsinites back towards the town. With the Federal skirmishers forced back to the earthworks, Van Dorn orders up the entire army of West Tennessee to form a battle line arching around the northwestern corner of Corinth. While the Confederates shake out their lines into a coherent formation, the Federal artillery opens up upon the rebel infantry, who can do little but weather the rain of shot and shell. Lovell, who is leading the column, forms the army's right flank upon the north side of the Memphis and Charleston Railroad. Hebert, leading Price's corps, anchors his left upon the Mobile and Ohio Railroad. Finally, Mallory, who is bringing up the rear of the army, forms his line in the center, filling the gap between Lovell and Hebert. Due to this arrangement, Van Dorn is not planning for a general reserve, which means no troops will be available to support an attack if there is a breakthrough. Facing these already demoralized Confederates is a belt of fallen timber laid upon uneven ground, backed up by earthworks and artillery, a terrifying sight for any Civil War soldier. As the Confederates form their lines, the artillery fire is not the only thing afflicting the Southern ranks. The temperature, just like the sun, is climbing higher by the minute. By the time the temperature reaches its peak, it will hover around 90 degrees, which causes hundreds of men on both sides to fall out of the ranks due to the heat. By 10 a.m., the Confederate army has completed its deployment and is ready to advance. With his ranks ready, Van Dorn orders an echelon attack from the right to the left, starting with Lovell's division. Van Dorn knows that the entrenchments do not extend to Lovell's front, which will make his initial assault easier. Thus, once a breakthrough is secure, each successive assault will see more success. However, despite hearing Van Dorn preach speed for days, Lovell dallies at the point of attack, just in time for the majority of Rosecrans' troops to fall into position. As each division reaches Corinth, Rosecrans wastes no time garrisoning the outer entrenchments to face off against Van Dorn's assault columns. On the far left, facing Lovell's eventual onslaught, is McKean's division of Western troops, who's anchoring his left on the Memphis and Charleston Railroad. On McKean's right are the arriving troops of Davies' division of Shiloh veterans, who fill the gap between McKean and the Mobile and Ohio Railroad. On the right side of the railroad is the recent arrivals of Hamilton's 2 brigades, protecting Davies' right. Finally, Rosecrans orders Stanley to form up his division south of Corinth when they arrive later that day to be the Army's reserve. All told, by 10 a.m., Rosecrans has thrown every man present on the front line, just in time to face Van Dorn's Confederates. Knowing that his men will be unlikely to hold the Confederates on the outer, weaker earthworks, Van Dorn has stressed to his officers to delay the Confederates for as long as possible, bloodying them as they attack, and only fall back in the face of overwhelming odds, slowly drawing the Confederates closer to the town in his recently constructed lunettes that surround the rail junction, where he plans to break the Confederate attack. A similar strategy that Grant employed at Shiloh, trading space for time. By 11 a.m., unable to wait any longer, Lovell proceeds with the attack, sending his brigades one after another towards the Federal earthworks. Starting the attack is Rust's brigade on the far right. Once Rust's men leave the protection of the trees, they are shredded by MacArthur's Wisconsinites. Rust reported after the battle that it appeared that the entire line would be swept away. Even with the ghastly holes being made in their lines, the Confederates close up and push on. Following in their wake are the other 2 brigades in Lovell's division, Bowen and Villapig, each applying their own pressure against the Federal line. Wanting to make sure Lovell is successful, Van Dorn orders a brigade from Maury's division to support the attack. To support Lovell, Maury sends Moore's brigade of Trans-Mississippi troops to his sector. Seeing a gap between McKean and Davies, the hot-headed Texan directs his men straight for the opening. Racing through the abattis, these Westerners make quick work of the Federal defenders, allowing them to crack McKean's position. Unable to withstand this assault from either the front or the flank, McKean pulls his line back and reforms in Battery F. Moore falls in the wake of the retreating Federals, ransacking their camps as they go. Lovell, on the other hand, is unsure of what to do next after taking the earthworks, allowing a momentary lull to consume the area. Meanwhile, further east, Price's sector is heating up as he gets his 2 divisions into the fight. Leading off his attack is Pfeiffer's brigade of Texas and Arkansas dismounted cavalry. Watching these assault columns advance, Davies knows it is only a matter of time before his outnumbered division is pushed back. First striking his left, Pfeiffer's men begin shredding Ogilby's ranks. Following Pfeiffer's path, Gates' Missourians join in and apply their own weight to the fight. Nevertheless, Oglesby's Shiloh veterans are able to hold their own only until Martin's brigade of Mississippians arrive to strike their right flank. Under pressure from 3 different brigades, Ogilby's veterans finally break, leaving Hackelman's Iowans alone to contend with the Confederates. After witnessing Ogilby's rout, Davies pulls his battered division back 1,000 yards to reform at 1 p.m. Hackelman holds only momentarily to fire off a few volleys into Greene's advancing Missourians before falling back. All along the front, the worn-out Confederates cheer about their success in their assault against the Union fortifications, capturing many prisoners and guns. However, their success has cost them dearly. Many officers and men have been mowed down by Federal guns, including 32-year-old Colonel John D. Martin. During the fight, he was hit in the shoulder by a Manet ball while leading his brigade, a wound that proved to be mortal. For now, the tired rebels rest and reform their lines for the next phase of the battle. With the outer entrenchments captured, many in the rebel army thought the hardest part of the battle was over. Yet, unbeknownst to almost everybody in the Confederate army, Rosecrans has another, stronger layer of earthworks, crowned with redoubts, just waiting for the Confederates to advance. Despite cracking Davies and McKean's forward position, the Confederates have only dealt a blow to a portion of Rosecrans' entire force. Hamilton's division, which is in the trees across the Mobile and Ohio Railroad, has not seen any fighting yet, and still holds his position on the outer earthworks, while Stanley, who's finally arriving in Corinth, is forming up his division just south of the town. As a momentary lull consumes the front, Rosecrans senses an opportunity to strike Price with a decisive blow. Knowing that Hamilton's division is not engaged, Rosecrans orders the New Yorker to face his entire division west and flank the advancing Confederates. As his orders arrive, Hamilton is confused about Rosecrans' intentions and stays put until he receives a clarification. Meanwhile, in the center, Moore continues his lone drive against the retreating Federals. Raising the rebel yell, Moore's brigade assaults Battery F and their supporting infantry, Crocker's Iowan Brigade. These two brigades fight until Lovell finally moves up, which forces Crocker to give up his tenuous hold at the redoubt. At 3 p.m., Price moves up his corps to continue the battle, but as they form up, confusion in the ranks prevent them from utilizing their local superiority in numbers. Instead of engaging a new Federal line with 4 brigades, only Greene's brigade of Missourians will attack. Once again, even with Van Dorn present on the scene, his lack of leadership squanders the momentum. Covered by artillery, Greene drives his brigade out of the woods and against the new Federal line formed by Davies' men at a building called the White House. As his Missourians get into the open, they are raked by short-range canister blasts from an array of artillery batteries, which tear great holes in the rebel lines. Even with this hail of lead, Greene refuses to give up and continues his advance. Realizing that a single brigade will not be able to break this new line, Price orders up Pfeiffer's brigade to help Greene's Missourians. With no infantry support facing Pfeiffer, the Union artillery falls back to replenish their ammunition, forcing Davies to contend with the Confederates alone. Knowing that his men cannot hold without artillery and retreat is not an option, the only thing Davies can do now is attack. Once Oglesby and Halcombe are ready, Davies gives the order to charge. Both brigades fire a volley and charge the Confederates. As his men bound forward, Davies witnesses the action. The enemy was forced back at the point of the bayonets with great slaughter across the open field. At this point, after being shredded by both rifle and artillery fire, Greene cannot stand against this unexpected onslaught. Greene's Missourians fall back across the very ground that paid dearly to cross. Knowing that Davies' men are at their breaking point, Rosecrans calls for support from Stanley's unused division. Once he receives Rosecrans' order, Stanley dispatches Mower's brigade of Westerners to the front. At 5 p.m., with light starting to dim, Mower's men reach the front just as Davies' men pull back, allowing these fresh troops to take on the rebels. Amid the fight between Mower and Greene, an almost surreal event occurs. As the 8th Wisconsin rushes into battle, they bring their famous mascot to the front, an eagle named Old Abe, who is well known on both sides. Once the Confederates see the eagle, the officers order their men to shoot the bird. As bullets begin to fly around Old Abe, his leash is hit, letting him fly from his keeper, as the 8th watches in absolute horror. For a time, both sides stop firing to watch the eagle soar above the lines. Thankfully, Old Abe soon takes refuge behind his bear and hides from the fight. Refusing to return to his perch, the bear brings Old Abe back to camp. Despite being the target of hundreds of men, Old Abe luckily escapes the battle with only some clipped feathers. In the midst of the fight, both of Davies' brigadiers are hit, Oglesby with a wound to the chest and Halcombe with a slit throat. Of the two, the latter proved to be mortal. Seeing the Union line start to crumble, Price plans for another assault to break into the town. But as his column advances, it is battered by the defenders, similar to Greene's treatment earlier, and pulls back. When darkness finally covers the area, the Federals are able to disengage and fall back to the last line. Despite holding off the Confederates from the town, the air surrounding the Union lines is demoralizing. They have fallen back 2 miles, suffered numerous dead and captured, and many are on their last legs both mentally and physically. Nonetheless, many try to get what sleep they can, knowing full well the Confederates will continue their attack in the morning. Across the lines, the atmosphere is completely different. Sensing victory is just around the corner, Van Dorn was to press forward with another assault. However, with reports of an entire Federal division on his left, exhaustion crippling his ranks, and light failing, Van Dorn is persuaded by Price to stop for the day. Though Van Dorn's men did not capture Corinth on October 3rd, he is quite happy with the results. He has breached Rosecrans' defenses, enacted considerable damage upon the ranks, and is poised to capture the town. Thus, the only thing remaining for the Confederates to do now is to get some sleep, and be ready to march into Corinth as conquerors in the morning. Exuberant at their imminent victory, the Confederate batteries open up early, breaking the ominous silence at 4 a.m. on Saturday, October 4th, 1862. The Federal batteries respond in kind, and the two sides trade shots vigorously with one another. While the batteries lob shells at each other, the Confederate infantry gets into position to pick up the battle where they left off. Van Dorn's plan to finish off Rosecrans is to attack in echelon from the left to the right, opposite his plan from the day before, starting with Hebert's division on the left and ending with Lovell's division on the right. With this, Van Dorn expects a quick victory no matter how Rosecrans has aligned his troops. Facing this imminent assault is Rosecrans' battered yet reformed ranks on his last line of defense, the College Hill Line. Named after the Corona Female College, an education institution for local women. If the Confederates break through here, they'll have uninhibited access to Corinth. Luckily, since the Confederates did not take the town the day before, the Federals were given ample time during the night to further strengthen their defenses for this impending attack. Now, with the sun rising, they will soon see how their enhanced fortifications stand up against the revitalized Confederates. At 7 a.m., the Confederates have maneuvered into position and are ready to attack, with all eyes looking left towards Hebert's division. However, as minutes tick by and the heat starts to rise, no sounds of battle are heard from Hebert's front. Van Dorn, who's anxiously waiting for Hebert to commence his attack, sends his staff officer to ascertain the reason for the delay. For some unknown reason, Hebert becomes too sick to command, but only notifies Price at 8 a.m. With Hebert incapacitated, Brigadier General Martin E. Greene, the ranking brigade commander, assumes Hebert's position and prepares for the attack. While Greene works out the kinks of his new command, both sides continue to suffer from the unrelenting bombardment of artillery. Finally, at 9 a.m., after 2 hours of standing in the heat, Greene is ready to lead Van Dorn's assault upon Corinth. Leading off Greene's assault is Colbert and his fresh brigade of Trans-Mississippi troops. When they move up the hill towards the Federal earthworks, they start running into problems. Not only are they being hit by every gun the Federals can turn on them, but they also find a nasty surprise waiting for them. McLean, in command of Martin's brigade, is the first to hit the Federal line. Thinking he found the Federal flank, he and Colbert curve around and break the Federal spur, only to find the brigades of Holmes and Buford bent back, just waiting for their flank attack. Annoyed with finding this new line, the Confederates undauntedly continue their charge into the storm of lead and engage these stubborn Federals. Further west, in the middle of Greene's line, the brigades of Gates and Greene direct their attack towards Battery Powell in the center of Davies' line. Just like the day before, these Missourians have to attack uphill against entrenched Federals, paying dearly for every step they take. One of the Missourians wrote that it was a dreadful charge uphill. Once the rebels reach Battery Powell, they storm over the earthen walls and kill the occupants. When the remainder of Davies' brigade see that Battery Powell has fallen, they leave their positions and retreat to the town, opening a gap in the middle of Rosecrans' line. The road to Corinth is open. Despite running low on both manpower and ammunition, the victorious Confederates pursue their beaten foes straight into the streets of Corinth. They penetrate so deep into the town that they near the depot and the Tishomingo Hotel. Here, they get into a nasty short-range shootout among the buildings with the remnants of Davies' brigades. During the scrap, Colonel William H. Moore, who's leading the charge into the town, is fatally wounded. Just as they are on the brink of capturing Corinth, the Confederates reach the limit of their exertions. With their left wing stalled on the flank, no reinforcements incoming, and out of ammunition, Gates is forced to call a retreat, giving up their bloody hold on the town. Seeing the rebels pull back, the Federals charge forward to retake their entrenchments. All along the front, Federal units begin their counterattack, driving back the rebel attackers out of Corinth and north towards their staging ground. Leading this charge is the 5th Minnesota, who charged forward and herd the Confederates back at the point of the bayonets. Realizing that any hope of victory is gone, Greene's Confederates run pell-mell north across the very ground they paid dearly to take only an hour earlier. Meanwhile, on Greene's right, Maury is gearing up to make his attack upon the Federal earthworks. When Maury hears that Greene has commenced his attack, he unleashes his trans-Mississippians upon the defenders. These troops rapidly step off toward their objective, Battery Robinette, the centerpiece of the Union line. Just like Greene's men, the Texans meet an unrelenting storm of lead but continue, leaving many dead as they move forward. One Federal wrote that when our 60-pounder howitzers were let off, it seemed as if it killed whole companies. Pfeiffer, leading Maury's advance, directs his attack against Fuller and his Ohioans, while Moore angles right towards the battery. In front of Moore's brigade is Colonel William P. Rogers and his 2nd Texas, stout veterans of Shiloh. Realizing that only a concentrated drive against Battery Robinette will overcome his defenders, Rogers, who is still mounted on his charger, takes his 2nd's flag and leads his men forward. The Texans scramble over the embrasures and lock bayonets with Robinette's men. In the face of such odds, courage alone is not enough to overcome Battery Robinette's defenders. Seeing the Confederates falter, Fuller orders a countercharge all along his front to break their momentum. With bayonets in hand, the Federals charge toward Battery Robinette to seal the gap. On top of the battery, Rogers realizes that any hope of escape is gone and tries to surrender but is riddled with bullets in the chaos. Those who survive flee the best they can back in the direction they came, with no chance to reform their lines. Stanley, who's watching this counterattack unfold, declares that hill was cleared in an instant. Even with these turn of events, if Lovell attacks now, the Confederates still have a chance to claim victory. Yet, while Greene's and Maury's Confederates are on the cusp of victory, for an unknown reason, Lovell refuses to join in the attack with his desperately needed brigades. Thus, by 11 a.m., only 2 hours after their attacks have begun, the battle comes to an end with the rebel survivors fleeing the town. Rosecrans, despite frantically putting together a defensive line, is able to beat back Van Dorn's desperate attempt to take Corinth. Once the Confederates are out of sight, Rosecrans rides up to the defenders of Battery Robinette and declares, "I stand in the presence of brave men, and I take my hat off to you." The 2-day battle Corinth devastates Van Dorn's small army. Due to his aggressive, mismanaged assaults against strong Federal earthworks, roughly 22% of his men have become casualties, compared to only 12% for Rosecrans' army. The failure to take Corinth or push the Federals north simply caps off Van Dorn's disastrous attempt to turn the tide in Mississippi. Just like their first retreat back in May, the Confederates are once again shamefully retreating from Corinth. This time, the Federals pursue their beaten foe, hoping to destroy Van Dorn's battered army once and for all. On October 5th, the day after the battle, Rosecrans picks up his pursuit of the Confederates, but is unable to catch his wounded prey. On the other hand, General Ord, who is sent south by Grant to support Rosecrans, blocks Van Dorn's retreat and almost captures Van Dorn's entire army at the Battle of Hatchie's Bridge. Yet, during the fight, Van Dorn finds another path and escapes complete destruction. Staying one step ahead of the Federals, the Confederates safely reach Holly Springs. The Second Battle of Corinth is not only a disaster for the Confederate fortunes in Mississippi, but also for Van Dorn's military career. Just like Pea Ridge months earlier, Van Dorn has gambled his army in a desperate, ill-planned assault and lost. When President Davis receives the news of Van Dorn's second defeat, he strips him of his command, and replaces him with Lieutenant General John C. Pemberton as the senior ranking general in the state. Price, on the other hand, finally receives permission to return to Missouri, but he will be returning alone, without his fellow Missourians. Agitated for the second time with Rosecrans for dallying in the face of the retreating Confederates, Grant chastises his subordinate for his lackluster performance. This rebuke forms a rift between Grant and Rosecrans that will last a lifetime. Unable to work with Grant again, Rosecrans will soon be given independent command in Tennessee. With his hold over Corinth solidified and the Confederates now in the defensive, Grant is free to once again move against the rebels. With no force keeping him caged up in northern Mississippi, Grant starts eyeing the Confederate bastion on the Mississippi, the vital river town of Vicksburg.